Well, hello
Hello.
everybody. We are back on My World. We have a long-awaited meeting. One of my favorite men here. One sitting next to me here, somebody that I met a few years back, and
We met like a decade ago.
I know I can't believe time has flown,
I
but
know.
every time we meet, it's always for a very interesting, very controversial reason. It's always my favorite. But next to me here, I have Scott Bernstein. He is the author of 6 books. He spent a lot of time dedicating his life to, researching and connecting the dots and understanding very well, all the backstory of the Purple Gang. I mean, any crime story you can really think of that I know has made any kind of history. I think Scott's done a pretty good job understanding what happened and how to connect it. So,
Thank you.
uh,
I take pride in being considered one of the leading experts on mob activity, organized crime in America, and try to spread the knowledge as much as I can because knowledge is power. And
it is.
um, I think that it's a part of history. It's a part of American history, and every city you go in, they have their own little slice of underworld history that is historically significant. And I'm from Detroit, so Detroit was kind of ground zero for me, and it started off as my bread and butter, and obviously Purple Gang, Jimmy Hoffa, are two big cornerstones of my research resume, and then I've been lucky enough to be able to expand the last, let's say, 5-6 years. I've expanded into Philadelphia, Chicago, and New England. So
Well, yes, you have, and I watch you. I mean, obviously, you're busy and not easy to get a hold of these days because you're a busy man.
I called you
You're
back the same day you called me.
you did you
I always
did
try to make a 24-hour rule.
you did. And I just thought I was special, so I was like,
Oh, well,
okay.
you are special.
um, well, thank you, and it's an honor to have him on the show. I've been a fan of his work and his research for many years, and alongside we have somebody online right now who has also spent a lot of time.
He
You
has
know,
more firsthand experience than I do. He was trial by error. I was sitting in libraries researching the stuff that he was actually out there doing.
yeah, you've done your time, and it's
Literally and figuratively.
literally and figuratively, Alan. And Alan Gunnar
Uh,
Lindblom is somebody who, he has also an author, and spent a lot of time understanding. I mean, he comes from the background. I don't know much to tell you, but I'm gonna let him tell you about himself because he's pretty good at that too. Alan, are you on?
Well, yes. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate that. And I'm gonna go on record with Scott. He's a very humble guy. To anybody, don't let anyone tell you differently. He is the best in the game. Now, he has mentors that he's looked up to for a long time, but I believe, in my opinion, he's approaching or surpassing them. And so,
Thanks, Alan.
all the
We're the
success that he's
next
having
generation.
and all the things. Yeah, well, we are.
Yep.
Christians involved too.
Yep.
Into that group. But you are any successes that you are heading towards or having is hard work, incredible hard work that you put in for the last decade or more. So you don't have to be so humble, man. You're the best, hardest working guy I know.
Thanks, bro.
So and the callback thing, Scott. We talk all the time. Me and Scott, and he told me about the callback rule is. Your value to somebody is based on the amount of time that takes to call them back. And so if somebody doesn't call you back, and every once in a while he'll call me and I'll forget and I'll call him back. I'm like, oh my God, you feel like
I never feel
dropped
like
a
that.
wrong or two.
If anybody understands people's busy schedules, it's me. Sometimes I'll put my phone down for an hour and I'll pick it up and I'll have 25 missed calls, 30 missed texts.
Yeah.
And on the other line
See,
as well,
it's the same thing.
not to last but certainly not least, we have Christian Cipollini on the other line as well here, who alongside Scott has won Mob Bloggers of the Year by the Mob Museum in Vegas, and has spent a lot of time doing his research and connecting the dots. It's really more so a passion for Christian. I see, and I follow him every single day. I love what he puts out there. He's a very positive individual, and I love your work in the fashion sense too. You got a lot to offer, Christian, and also an author of how many books now, Christian?
First, well, okay, I have 3 books, but first I have to say these other 2 guys on there. You guys are far more humble than me. I'll admit I'm probably the antithesis of the humble, but I do self-deprecating humor. It is tongue-in-cheek, and you guys know me. So anyway, 3 books. And yeah, actually, Scott, I'll just say this since we're kissing everybody's ass right now. Scott was actually one of my first mentors, one of the first people I reached out to when I was writing Diary of a Motor City Hitman. So
great book, by the way.
Major kudos there.
yeah.
And Alan approached me, and which we still got to talk, man. We'll do that off the show.
Yeah, I've been waiting on that project.
Yeah, I know, man. Oh, that's been on hold. We'll talk about that. That's been like in limbo. It's still going, but just in limbo for like 2 years. So we'll get to that. Anyway,
welcome to my life, Christian.
Nancy,
Right.
Yeah, I know. Right?
I've had a Hoffa
Thanks
project
for having me.
in LA in limbo in different stages of development for 3 years. And it's like every time it looks like it's about to get off the ground, it doesn't. So I can relate.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Actually, since you brought that up, I got to talk to you, too, about the L.A. thing and the other thing.
Yeah.
I got some info, but it's all the secret shit we're talking about right now.
Well, obviously the reason why we're getting together, not the main reason, obviously, but the thing that kind of brought it to this point is the other secret that has been going on for 44 years. And let's talk about it now, because he's a very influential man and is still, to this day, one of the biggest mysteries in American history. James Riddle Hoffa disappeared on July 30th, 1975, and was declared dead in 1982.
Disappeared from a restaurant parking lot in Bloomfield Township, Michigan.
That's correct. Well, is it correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
He disappeared from the Red Fox parking lot on the corner of Telegraph and Maple. It's the last place that he was seen. It now is a location for the Andiamo restaurant chain, which is, I believe, the biggest Italian restaurant chain in Michigan.
Yeah.
Actually has some connections to the Detroit crime family, to the same people that were central in the conspiracy to kidnap and murder Jimmy Hoffa. Some of the people that own Andiamo are married to the daughters of some of the people that were involved.
Yes, the history goes down. I don't think most people like talking about it too much because nobody wants to get.
I love the irony, though, that the people behind the Hoffa conspiracy were also, I guess, marginally or tangentially involved in the decision to put Andiamo at the same location that Hoffa had disappeared from.
Is it a coincidence, though?
I don't know. Maybe it's like them planting a flag of some sort. I don't know.
It could be. This is.
I spent my whole life.
Scott, there's
my whole life going
another
there, by the way.
degree of irony, and I want to bring up on that note. If you think, I don't know if we should even talk about it, but the thing in Vegas that's connected to Andiamo's and your friend, and so if you think about all that, how it's all tied together, because Hoffa was involved with the Teamster pension, with the loaning money to Detroit to build casinos, all kind of a full circle.
So one of the things Gunner's referencing, and we're going to try to dance around this issue without getting ourselves cease and desist letters,
right?
But so Andiamo has an outpost, if you will, or a location in Las Vegas that's downtown Las Vegas in the D Casino, which is the Detroit themed casino.
They sure do.
And it's it's the only Andiamo. It's the only Andiamo outside of the state of Michigan. And I know that the D Casino takes pride in bringing kind of Detroit brand names to Vegas. They have an American Coney Island. They have other.
It's about time.
Yeah.
It's about time.
So you go if you're out in Vegas and you're gambling and you want a good Italian meal, go in and see the guys at Andiamo. You can get a little taste of the Detroit mob and Jimmy Hoffa.
It's and they're good. It's freaking delicious.
Yeah. But like Alan said, I mean, Jimmy Hoffa was pretty much personally responsible for giving the Teamsters loans that built the Las Vegas skyline. So,
Well, and that's another thing that kind of led up to some of the upset.
well, that's
Right.
The protection of that entity or the wanting the tug of war over who was going to control the purse strings of that pension fund, which was hundreds of millions of dollars that were being given out in low interest to no interest loans to pretty much any wise guy that applied would get the rights, not just to build casinos, but to open up businesses around the country with these Teamster pension fund loans, and control over that pension fund was very important. It was the golden goose that was laying the golden eggs, and the mob wanted Jimmy Hoffa away from the control of the pension fund. Jimmy Hoffa wanted to reclaim his position at the forefront of control of that pension fund, and
that
it came to a
definitely
head, and he vanished.
Definitely put a target on his back, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
That's where I think the movie The Irishman went wrong, to me, in my opinion, is that like they had their theory of how and why his disappearance, but they didn't. I don't think they addressed. I hadn't seen the movie, so I'll be honest. But I read the book, some of that book, and they didn't address the fact that like families like Detroit and other families and wise guys who had built these casinos and business all over the country, they had a lot at stake, and Hoffa was lording it over them, the knowledge of and cahoots, and it went all the way to the president. And so when he started saying, I want to come back in power, I want to control this money, and making soft threats, Scott knows more than me.
I wouldn't say they were soft threats. I would say they were pretty hard threats. Going on national television, going on 60 Minutes, and saying that he was gonna cleanse the union of mob influence, and the irony being that he opened the door to all that mob influence, or a lot of it at least.
Right. So that weren't soft threats. I mean, but whatever. So you have families like Detroit who had a lot in the stake in the game, but in this movie, The Irishman, it's like they don't even acknowledge that how much they had in the game, and other people too. It was just one little theory. They worked with it, they ran with it, made a movie out of it. But that's
the movie
went wrong.
The movie definitely deals with control of the pension fund and Hoffa's desire to get back in the Teamsters union. But I think the point Gunner's trying to make, which is very valid, is that the city of Detroit, whether we're talking about the mafia or just the fact that Hoffa lived in Detroit for his whole life and built the Teamsters Union to the monolithic heights he did from his base at Local 299 down in Southwest Detroit at the corner of Michigan and Trumbull, right by the old ballpark. That completely gets, I don't even want to say marginalized, because that's almost an understatement. I mean, it just doesn't exist.
It didn't exist.
The city of Detroit doesn't exist. The Detroit mob doesn't really exist. So I think that was a pretty giant misstep in the telling of that story.
And it's upsetting because it's four of our beloved, most favorite actors.
Yes.
You wanted better for
them. It's a 4-hour movie or a 3-hour and 45-minute movie, and literally I think less than 3 minutes of it take place in Detroit. And I've said this a couple times. I mean, on interviews. I mean, for the sake of that film, for the narrative that film was telling, Jimmy Hoffa might as well have lived in Honolulu. I mean, really,
historically, biographical films. Well, any of you guys who know me know I always go on my soapbox about that. I get it with Hollywood and the creative license they feel they need to take based on their marketing algorithms, but ultimately, I think for the most part, I don't know if you guys would agree, but we have yet to see a truly biographical picture that has satisfied any of us to a large extent. I don't know. I've not seen anything. Have you guys? I mean, even this one, there was stuff that was good about it. And to Alan, what you said, yeah, they actually did address the reason, I guess, that Hoffa was such a threat with the money. Nancy, what you had said about coincidence, I'll also throw this in there. In the underworld, I've found nothing is a coincidence.
Right.
It really isn't. It's
Yep.
And-
truth is stranger
Right.
than fiction, but
And that was my point in
everything's
saying that.
connected.
Obviously, we know.
Right. And so the audience knows. Believe me, nothing is coincidental in the underworld. Never has been. But as with that movie, yeah, they did address at least that part of it, because a lot of people really don't understand why Hoffa was the target. And they did, but you're right about the Detroit thing. And there was so much going on in Detroit. I don't
Right.
want to go on a tangent, but Detroit in 1975 was, in my opinion, the most unusual dynamic of underworld activity. I mean, from the top politics down to the low-level drug dealers. It was the most corrupt, crazy city ever. It's the most fascinating in the way it all
Wide open
connected.
city.
And Hoffa was like right in there. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think the movie also, Alan, I'll hold on one second. I apologize for interrupting you. I was just going to say that I think that one of the issues I had as well was they addressed the issue about the pension fund and control of the pension fund and Hoffa's insistence on coming back into a union that he wasn't welcomed back into from the mob. Now, he was definitely would have been welcomed back by the rank and file, which was the big worry that if he reached the 1976 election for the Teamsters presidency, he would have won in a landslide. So the rank and file wanted him back, but the mob who controlled the union didn't want him back. But I thought one of the biggest issues in terms of the real story compared to the story that Hollywood was telling you in that film, they really sanitized Hoffa in a lot of ways, where they made it seem like the character in some of the dialogue was like, Frank Fitzsimmons, just so people know, Frank Fitzsimmons was the guy that replaced Hoffa, was one of Hoffa's proteges, and it was his vice president. And when Hoffa had to relinquish the Teamsters presidency in order to get out of prison early via a presidential pardon, he turned the union over to Frank Fitzsimmons, thinking that Fitzsimmons was just going to kind of keep the seat warm, and then he would retake the presidency when he came out of prison. The mob preferred Fitzsimmons in that position than Hoffa because he was much more malleable and easier to manipulate and did what he was told. But there was some of this dialogue, and Christian, you might remember this, where Hoffa's complaining, Frick, they just like Fitzsimmons because, he'll let any mobster into the union, and he'll just give any mobster that wants it a Teamsters loan. And it's like, well, right. Jimmy, you've been doing that for the previous 20 years. So this notion that he was kind of this man of the people that was getting a raw deal by the mafia is, again, a little bit revisionist history. Alan, go ahead. I apologize.
Painting him as a victim almost.
Yeah.
No, what I was saying is disregard the fact that, this huge hand that Detroit had in the game or dog in the fight, and say, what a lot of people don't know, Scott knows for sure, Kristen, I'm sure you do too, is Detroit had, 4 casinos in Vegas, and the feds tried to track down where the money came from, and they juggled a bunch of money from loans and family. Bottom line is, it was Teamster money. And so at the end of the day, and another thing is, and this is where I kind of had my grandfather and my Uncle Sal, Pete Tocco, they've told me things like, when it came time to get for the president to run for election, they needed the Teamsters, they needed UAW, they needed there's a I can't remember where I heard it. It's a tape where the president is telling an aide, and they never told.
It's part of the Watergate tapes.
Right, and he said, basically, in regards to getting those unions behind him in the Midwest, they said on tape, they want $1 million. And the president says, well, what's the problem? Put $1 million in a briefcase and give it to him. Now, they never determined who that was, but everybody assumed that it was Detroit, because they had control over the UAW and Hoffa.
Well, I think
who was all the Teamsters.
I think the money was to buy the commutation.
Well, yeah, there's that too. So yeah, yes. But in the long run, he gets the commutation, I think he gets the Teamsters back behind him. You know what I'm saying? He didn't want Hoffa in charge of the Teamsters, but he had a lot of influence, still with the union, the Teamsters. But anyway, there's the moral of the story is there's that huge factor in that these casinos that were built in Vegas by Teamster money, and Tony Zarelli ends up in prison for this, and then in the movie
the whole operation was.
The
reason
reason why I'm saying all this is because if you ask the average person in America, or they don't even know, like based on that movie, how big of a hand Detroit had in this whole thing. It's the reason why he was killed in Detroit. It's the reason why he was kidnapped and killed. Because it happened there. It was the main. So in the movie, you get people from Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, all over the country. They're like, Detroit. What the hell's Detroit got to do with anything? I mean, that's kind of like
they didn't even tell you in the movie that he lived in Detroit. You're just supposed to assume it because they're kidnapping him and killing him in Detroit. But they don't. You wouldn't know if you had no knowledge of who Jimmy Hoffa was. You wouldn't even know he was from Detroit.
Right.
No, and interestingly, one thing I did like about the film is that they would do the little pop-up video kind of things and tell you like what happened to so and so. Why didn't they do that? Basically, like here, Detroit, main place.
The only character that was from Detroit was the Tony Giacalone character, and it was really just. You want to talk about getting history wrong? Well, not just brief, but getting history just completely backwards. They presented the Tony Giacalone character as some type of clown, as some type of lackey for Tony Provenzano that was some type of driver or bodyguard for Provenzano. And in reality, Tony Giacalone was the one that was calling all the shots for the entire Hoffa murder conspiracy, was being quarterbacked by Tony and Billy Giacalone. And really, Tony Provenzano had played a very minor role in the Hoffa murder conspiracy, but because of there's kind of this East Coast bias towards just all mafia reporting, he gets interjected as a bigger role in it. Yeah, his beef with Hoffa is what led to the sit down where Hoffa was kidnapped and murdered, but they just really used Tony Provenzano as a way to lure Hoffa out into the open to kill him. The beef between Hoffa and Provenzano, while it was very real and very bitter, was not the reason that Hoffa was murdered.
So where do you guys think they get their sources, though?
Good.
Where do you think they got the story from?
They got the story from the book. I Heard You Paint Houses.
And if the book is off, then
There's been a pretty significant backlash in the last 6 weeks from major media outlets that are writing a ton of stuff about how the entire movie and the book that the movie's based on is all fiction.
Well, I'm glad somebody's.
Well, didn't his agent tell him I can't get the book published unless you say you killed Hoffa?
Well, I can't speak to what Frank Wyman told Charlie and Frank Sheeran, but Frank Wyman is my agent, and I can tell you that what I know for sure is that book was out for sale on 2 separate occasions. Once with another author, and I can't think of that author's name, and it didn't sell. And then they brought Charlie Brandt onto the project, who's the author of the book and was Frank Sheeran's agent. Or sorry, let me back up for a second. They brought Charlie Brandt onto the project. He was Frank Sheeran's lawyer. The agent was Frank Wyman, who was actually my agent. And I know that they went out again with the book with Charlie Brandt as the author. They couldn't sell it. So it went out twice for market, couldn't sell. And then there was some type of meeting of the minds, and they went out a third time with the book. This time, the third proposal said that Sheeran had killed Hoffa, and they sold it. They didn't sell it to a big publisher. They sold it to a small publishing company. I think the advance was like $20,000, which is a pretty small advance, if you're publishing on a regular basis. And they're the ones that are having the last laugh, though. I mean, the book became a New York Times bestseller. That book will be selling for the next 100 years. It will be on shelves and being printed for decades. They're going to be making money off this thing for decades. Charlie Brandt and Frank have probably walked away with a couple million already just based on this book being turned into a film. So I don't begrudge them. That's the dream, and they're living the dream. And I say more power to you, even though they're the dream is based on some huge lies and falsehoods. But it's everyone's dream to get a book that hits that level of success and reaches that kind of what I call the pop culture sweet spot.
Right.
And they definitely did it.
Well done with that dance, Scott.
Thank
I
you.
forgot that Wyman was your agent.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm not going to discredit anything. Well done.
Well, I mean, Frank's had to do interviews, and has to stand behind the book. So whether or not he actually believes that or not, I don't know. But it's his book, and
Right.
Frank Sheeran's not alive anymore. So Charlie Brandt's not doing interviews. Again, I have a lot of respect for Charlie, even though I strongly disagree with what he's written. I have respect for him as an author, as an attorney, and I definitely respect the fact that he's had this much success with that book. What I don't respect is the fact that he won't do any interviews. He's refusing all media requests because he knows.
Why?
Why do you think, Alan?
I
Think about
I
it.
get it.
Because he knows that he's going to have to sit there and defend a lie.
Right.
So he's just not going
to. De Niro did it.
Right. So he's letting De Niro and Scorsese and the agent Frank Wyman have to go out there and take all the bullets, and he's refusing to do interviews, which I think is weak.
I agree.
Yeah, that is.
I mean, if you're gonna put something out there,
Stand by it.
Wouldn't it feel better to know that it was at least factual?
Stand by it.
I don't know. That's just me.
What he leans
They knew
on
from the beginning, Nancy, that it's not. They knew.
What he leans on and what he uses as his kind of canned response to why you believe what Sheeran told you is that he says that he was a prosecutor and that he was an expert at being able to interrogate and debrief criminals, and through that experience, he was able to decipher who was lying and who wasn't, and that he says through his experience, through his his resume of vetting bad guys, that Sheeran passed muster with him. So that's what he that's the company line coming from the Charlie Brandt camp.
Well, I mean, I would have loved to have seen you guys direct this movie. I feel like it would have been a much different movie.
Hey, give us $200 million.
Mm-hmm.
We'll make it better.
Yep,
200 million.
I'm in.
Make movies great again.
Well, here's the thing. My biggest issue with something like this, and it's different. These are two true crime writers right here, two of the best in the business, Scott and Christian. I'm a fiction novelist. I mean, I do write some true crime about my life, but I'm a storyteller. So I'm about great stories, big characters, very complex plots. And I look at this book that they base this on like a lot of it's bull crap, pretty obvious. And I'm like, for $200 million, this is what you come up with this all-star cast and Scorsese.
Right.
It kind of, to me, it's like a kick in the nuts to me, the fact that I have novels out that people are saying this is as good as The Godfather, maybe better. Imagine if they just took a quarter of that.
Maybe
budget,
better.
Had some good actors.
Maybe better.
Maybe better. I'm just saying. People are saying. And they're saying they shoes to fill, and I'm just saying if they could have taken my novel and created a $50 million budget, wouldn't use some younger actors that aren't going to be so expensive, and a good director that's got talent, and made take a really good story and make a generational epic mafia story that people remember in 30, 40 years. The only reason people are going to remember this is because it's controversial and because the all-star cast. They won't remember it because it was a great story. They're not going to be thinking about it for months going, man, that was an awesome story. I was in tears, or I was like emotionally attached to the characters or whatever. This won't happen with this movie. So to me, this is what the
Welcome to
problem I have.
Hollywood. Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
I think all three of us know, because I mean, Alan, if they haven't come to you yet, and they may have, I know they've Scott and I have danced this dance with book options to Hollywood, and it's almost like if it does happen, man, you have to bite the bullet, I guess, as much as I hate to say that, and be like, hey, give me the big fat check because I know you guys are going to mangle this.
Well, and how
But
many?
at the same time, it's a
What
big
percentage do
payday.
you think of the options that get put on books actually get turned into films? I mean, I know the
Oh,
answer.
it's so small.
5%.
Right.
Very slim. So even if you reach the
Right.
point where someone's coming to put an option on your book, even if it's a major name, whether it be a studio or a director or a writer or an actor, they want to. It's still, I would say, unlikely that it will actually hit the silver screen.
Right. I've dealt with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I know. And then I learned the hard way how this whole business works. And I guess what I'm saying is you'd almost, as an author, a researcher, a fiction writer, nonfiction, doesn't matter. You're so relieved if something actually gets green-lighted 10 years after it's been optioned,
Right.
because most of it gets shelved or the option,
Well, look at this.
expires, and you're sitting there like, WTF.
The Irishman was a ten.
But
Was a
that's
10.
Hollywood.
The Irishman was a. I Heard You Paint Houses, which is what The Irishman is based on. The book we were just talking about. That option got put on, I think, in 05 or 06. So I mean, it took 12, 13 years.
I've been
Right.
waiting for this
be in
movie
it
for
the
so
long
many
haul.
years.
I mean, I know with me, it's a
Right.
long haul. A lot of people are always asking me, Gunnar, when are they going to make a movie out of it? I'm like, my God, it could be 10 years from now. I mean, it's just part of the game. But,
Right, that's the
astonishing
reality.
part-
That's the reality.
Yeah.
I think
The
if it
astonishing
wasn't
part
for
to
the
me is that
actors, I don't know how
look at how
much
many
that
bad
movie would be
movies there are.
watched.
Yep. Well, and for
There's so many bad movies getting made, and then every once in a while you'll find a book or good story, a rare gem, and you're like, why aren't they making this?
Mm-hmm.
Instead, they make sequels to comic books and another Fast and Furious, and they put 100 million because they're scared that listen, they know what sells, what's going to make their money back.
It's a
and give them
business model.
return.
It's just a business model. They know if they
Somebody-
spend $200 million on a Fast and Furious, they're going to make back $800 million. If they spend, I'm kind of getting hip to this over the last couple of years about budgets, and because I've been doing work out in Hollywood. For adult themed dramas that are geared towards people that are interested in great stories, great plots, great dialogue, you're lucky if you get a $20 million budget. So I mean, Alan,
Yeah.
I hope to God Alan eventually reaches a point where they're playing with his novels and they want to adapt them into film or television. But even something like that, I mean, he's talking about a $50 million budget. I don't think they would ever. I mean, I was involved in the White Boy Rick film, and they had a $35 to $40 million budget, and everyone was going like, "You don't know how rare this is to have this size of a budget for this kind of a movie." And it was a giant disaster, and they didn't. And it actually proved a lot of people's points that you shouldn't make those kind of movies because that $40 million or $35 million only had a $20, $25 million return. Now all the movies that we're railing against, and I can appreciate, I call them popcorn movies. I can appreciate them for what they are, the Marvel films and the Star Wars and all the franchise films and the built-in brand recognition. But they, it's a science. I mean, they know if they spend $100 million, they can spend $200 million, $200 million on these movies, and they're making back their money tenfold.
It's easier to know when it's already happened and you've seen what happens.
They've crunched the numbers. They the analytics, the metrics. They know if these certain brands, and it's crazy. Sometimes. These Marvel movies will come out. They'll have a $150 million budget or $200 million, and they'll only make $300 million. They'll double their return. They'll have a double on the return, and they'll look at that and be like, "Well, that's not very good," because all their other movies have a quadruple return or a quintuple return.
Hey, here's the lesson.
What chances they?
Let me make the mob connection here. Everything is about money. Like Scott said, Hollywood knows what makes money. The mob knows what makes money, and that's all that mattered. Hence why Hoffa was killed. It's the same reason something gets made in Hollywood, because it's not about beating people up. It's not about killing people. It's about making money, and if something interferes with that, then you take action. So in Hollywood, they just have a different way of slaying all their enemies. But that's my lesson for the boys and girls out there today.
And you know what? At the end of the day, this project, The Irishman, I don't think making money was really an objective of theirs. I think that this was a prestige. This was a
lost leader.
This was
The
a
lost leader.
What did you say?
The lost leader. Basically, they were just trying to bait people into Netflix subscriptions, and that's why they made the movie. Whether
I
made
think
$200 million at box office or back or not, they didn't care. They wanted people to subscribe to watch the movie and then go, wait, what's this other cool stuff on Netflix? And like, this is cool, that cool, and they stay with it.
I think that's part of it, but I don't think that's the whole thing. I mean, I think a lot of it is simply prestige. And they view that the $200 million they spent was so there would be the spectacle that was and that is. I mean, they've gotten 30 million eyes on this. They got 30 million eyes on this thing in the first week. I mean, that's insane. If there had been a box office, that 200 million would have been a 500 million return on the first weekend.
No. Especially with those actors.
Right, and here we are talking about it. They got
subscribe to Netflix because of it.
I don't think I have a hard time believing. I'm not saying that that's not what they're saying, but I have a hard time. Who do you know that at this point in time that doesn't have a Netflix subscription? I don't know anybody.
I don't.
Okay, well you live out in the wilderness, bro.
Yeah.
Like
You're literally in the Ozarks. Literally.
I'm just saying, who do you know? I mean, 99% of the world right now that are living by a mid-level income. I'm not talking about lower middle, but everyone has a Netflix subscription. I don't feel like this particularly got them a ton of subs. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there was a ton of people that were like, I got to sign up for Netflix to watch this.
I know some people who actually, I remember seeing these post-Irishmen on the pages and stuff, and somebody's like, man, I'm going to sign up so I can get it and watch it. Maybe get like a 1 month free subscription.
No, I'm not saying that those people didn't
exist. I think there's more people that you realize that don't have Netflix, and this actually baited them in. I'm not saying it's the sole reason, but I'm just saying I think they got a lot of new subscribers because once you're in, you start watching Ozarks and Narcos and all these other great shows that is on Netflix or whatever, and they're like, oh, this is cool. What is it, $12 a month? I mean,
I think now it's like
deal.
15,
but
they've upped it.
And then you watch.
But they want to win Oscars. They want to win Oscars, and this movie, I'm telling you, is going to win the Oscar. So that's all that Netflix really cares about.
That's the prestige, right?
And just, I mean, this thing really struck a chord and resonated with the country, if not the world. We can sit here and we can knock it for its historical veracity. I didn't think it was a particularly great movie. I thought it was good. As Christian said, I thought in parts of it were very good. I don't think it is an all-time classic in any regard. I don't think it's an all-time Scorsese classic in any regard. But, I mean, this was a Grand Slam win for them. I mean, everybody was talking about this movie for... the second it came in the theaters at a limited release, I think November 1st, and then it hit Netflix on November 27th. And ever since it hit Netflix on November 27th, I mean, it's been on the forefront of conversation everywhere.
Yes, it has. But then you get lucky. It's a half a conversation, and then you have those actors, and then what you get is a bunch of people that are going to be curious enough to watch, and also regardless of whether they know.
And also, just to be clear, the $200 million. Was pure vanity for Scorsese. If he would have done this as a traditional theater release, he would have had, let's say, $100 million budget, and he would have had to make the movie 3 hours. He wanted the $200 million budget to make the movie 4 hours, and the $200 million budget, $100 million of that 200 went towards this de-aging technology. So it wasn't even anything substantive in terms of the script or the set pieces or special effects. It was simply to take 75-year-old Pacino, De Niro, and Pesci and allow them to play 35-year-old Pacino, Pesci, and De Niro. Now, whether or not that they pulled that off, we can sit there and debate it. But that
it was nice.
Again, it was a vanity. A lot of this was a vanity project for Scorsese, just wanting to have that type of freedom. And I guess if you're Martin Scorsese and you're the greatest director to ever live, as some people consider him, I mean, I know he's my favorite director. Maybe it's this is his right. Maybe he's done so much, he deserves it.
You can play with your money when you're Scorsese.
Yeah.
So I guess at this point, I mean, we can talk about it all we want. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, we kind of know that there is more truth than what we saw in the movie. There's obviously, some things that don't really match up and don't connect.
Let's start with the fact that Frank Sheeran did not kill Jimmy Hoffa.
Let's start with that.
I mean,
Right.
so what you saw in the movie, in terms of here's what was true in the movie. Frank Sheeran was a Teamster. Frank Sheeran was a enforcer for certain mob bosses in Pennsylvania. Frank Sheeran had met Jimmy Hoffa. That's it.
End of story.
That's it, right there.
And there's a real version of The
That's
Irishman.
the story.
Yeah.
Right.
It's, you know what, it's Hollywood, and there's really, what do we do at the end of the day except for disagree with it as much as anybody would any other movie.
I know some FBI agents right now that are doing a project. I'm not sure what outlet they're doing it for, but it's like a written project that might eventually turn into something on the screen. But they've been in contact with me, and there are I think 3 or 4 FBI agents right now that represent different, or I should say, they're retired FBI agents that represent different offices that have investigated the Hoffa case, and they're right now trying to find one murder that Frank Sheeran was tied to. Forget about Hoffa. They're trying to find any murder
Just one.
that Sheeran was tied to because they believe that Frank Sheeran's never murdered anybody, let alone Jimmy Hoffa. So, I mean, he can sit there in the book and they can talk about, I heard you paint houses, which for people that don't know is, according to them, is an expression of how a hitman identifies himself. I paint houses, meaning that you shoot someone in the head and his blood goes on the walls. I've also heard people say, both guys in the mob and guys in federal law enforcement, since that terminology has reached the masses from the book, saying I've never heard that before. Like, I don't know where that came from.
I'm gonna go ahead and say it was my first time hearing that term.
Christian,
Scott,
have you heard it?
We have you on the line. I think this is a great time to hear your actual theory on how this happened. And I don't, my theory, I got a theory similar to yours basically, but since you're here in the audience, Market probably wants to hear your theory too. All I remember is that when I asked my grandfather years and years ago, not that he knew anything or he didn't. What I'm saying is that he palled around with these guys. They were at our house all the time. Tony Giacalone and Jack Tocco, and we all lived in the same neighborhood, and they spent a lot of time at our house. And I remember a couple times asking him these things into my teens, and he'd always, let's go for a walk. And I'm like, I just want to go for a walk. Eventually, my Uncle Sal Tocco said, he takes you for a walk because the house might be bugged because, all these guys come over here, Tony Corrado and all these guys, Tony Jekyll, at our house all the time. So eventually I said, what's up with Hoffa? And again, let's go for a walk. And I said, what's the story behind Hoffa? And he says, listen, Alonzo, this is off the record while we're walking down the street. He says, it's not something you should ask about. Don't ask about it. Don't talk about it. He says, just know that they're never going to find him. And he says, and if you were to know anything, this exact words, he said, you don't want to know the answer to that because if the feds put you in, hem you up, put you in a room, put you under a lie detector, and they ask you if you have any, of course I would never know anything. I was only 2 years old when it happened, but things could be passed along. He said, you just don't want to have knowledge of that. Not that a lie detector is admissible in court anyways, but he said that. You don't want to know, so just let it.
Every single mob figure from Detroit that was called into the FBI office from 1975 until now, the first thing they ask them, they pull a picture out of Jimmy Hoffa and they say, tell us what you know about this, and all your problems are erased.
You know what? I may have been asked. I got called in by the feds 4 different times, and I think they did ask me, do you have any knowledge of Hoffa? I'm like, are you kidding me, man? I was freaking 2 years old. So what I'm saying is, I do remember that conversation. I told you about it, Scott, where my grandpa was with Tony Giacalone, and he says, I'm going downtown to see Jimmy. Or Tony Giacalone said that, I'm going to see Jimmy. And my grandpa's like, ooh, Hoffa? Kind of jokingly. And he said, oh, no, Hoffa, he's still downtown waiting for a ride. That's his exact words. I remember it stuck out in my mind. So that's, I think the cremation thing, like your theory on that, or that he was ground up in the pig's feed at Detroit Meat Packing Company. But what happened before that is exactly what I believe Scott's theory is, like right to the T. He could have been cremated. He never left Detroit, and he was dead. So maybe what's that black guy who said
Agreed.
he stuck, huh? Scott.
Well,
no, I agree with.
You guys are breaking up.
No, go ahead.
Are you guys there?
Yeah. Go ahead.
What was the
Go ahead,
question?
Well, I was just saying, there's a black guy, Scott knows who. He said he stumbled upon the murder of Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah,
his
Mike.
story and timelines are plausible, but
Mike.
Scott
I don't know about his timeline being plausible, but Mike Yarbrough is a former corrections officer that claims that he happened upon Hoffa being buried at the Renaissance Center. His timeline has changed over the last 5 years, which is one of the reasons that I kind of question his theory. But I do believe that he believes very intensely that he saw this. Out of all of the insane theories that have zero plausibility, I would say that the Renaissance Center theory has the most plausibility of the theories that have no plausibility.
Right.
The Renaissance.
That guy called me every day for like 2 months.
Yeah,
he wanted me to go on Fox News, Charlie Langdon, to just give my piece. I'm like, man, I am not going on Fox News to talk about Hoffa with you. You know what I'm saying? I don't. I said, Scott, go to Scott, and he did go to you, and you basically told him your opinions and thoughts, and which you should share now, Scott. Go through the timeline, and Christian too, because you know a lot of knowledge about this. What happened that day, Scott?
Jimmy Hoffa was picked up at the Red Fox at about 2:45.
Tony Giacalone.
You broke up. Say it again.
By Vito Giacalone.
Yeah, I'll give you my theory. So Tony Giacalone and Tony Provenzano had allegedly agreed to have a sit down with Jimmy Hoffa regarding this beef with the Teamsters, and Hoffa needed to get Provenzano's support in order to win the Teamsters presidency in the 76 election. He had been at odds with Provenzano. They had one time been very close friends. They'd had a falling out, a very bitter falling out, where they were threatening to kill each other and kill each other's families. But Hoffa realized that he had to make amends with Provenzano in order to take back the Union. Tony Giacalone was the broker of this sit-down. The sit-down was supposed to take place at 2 o'clock at the Marcus Red Fox at Telegraph and Maple. Hoffa showed up at 2 o'clock. He was a stickler for being on time. That's shown in the film. That's true. They made him wait for 45 minutes. He thought he had been stood up. He had the restaurant was in a parking lot that also housed was the home of a shopping mall. And he went to a hardware store in the shopping mall, called his wife, told him that he had been ditched at this meeting, and that was going to grab some steaks at the grocery store and come home and grill the steaks for dinner. That was at about 2:40. As he was walking back to his car, he was intercepted by a group of mob figures that are believed to have been the hit team. They were driving Tony Giacalone's son's car, a 1975 Mercury Marquis, owned by Joey Giacalone, who was Tony Giacalone's, at that time, I think it was his 23, 24-year-old son. And I believe that the people in that car were Billy Giacalone, who was Tony Giacalone's younger brother and fellow mafia capo, someone that was an incredibly powerful presence in the Detroit underworld, as well as, just like his brother, someone whose reputation preceded him wherever he went across the country, had a lot of respect in other crime families. Tony Palazzolo, I believe, was in the car. He was a young mob soldier at that time who represented the Downriver region in Detroit. He was a bodyguard and driver for Peter Vitale, Bozzy Vitale, who was the godfather of Greektown, who was centrally involved in the conspiracy as the guy that was running interference with New York Bozzy Vitale was keeping all the East Coast mobsters abreast of what was happening in Detroit. So you had a representative from the Giacalone crew, who was Billy Giacalone. You had a representative from the Vitale crew, who was Tony Palazzolo. And then I think you had a representative from Tony Pro's crew, Salvatore Sally Bugs Bergoglio. I believe those are the three people that picked Hoffa up at about 2:45 in the parking lot of the Marcus Red Fox. At that point, I believe he was taken about a 2 or 3 minute drive north on Telegraph to Long Lake Road, where there was a house that was owned by Carlo Licata. Carlo Licata was the brother-in-law of Jack and Tony Tocco. Jack Tocco at that time was the acting boss of the Detroit Mafia, one of the main conspirators and organizers of the Hoffa hit. Licata's house was a frequent sit-down location for Tony Giacalone to discuss labor union business. Hoffa had been to that house to meet Tony Giacalone at least 3 times in the year or 2 leading up to this. So he would have felt comfortable going to the Licata house, especially if Billy Giacalone was in that car saying, hey, Jimmy, Tony wants to be, have this meeting in private, doesn't want to be at a public location. We're going to move the meeting up to Licata's house up the street. I think he would have felt comfortable going there. It was only about a 2-3 minute drive. They got to the house. The house was known throughout the Detroit underworld as the House on the Hill because it was kind of lifted up on a hill and removed from the main street. And the elevator, the garage was secluded. I believe they drove him into the garage, probably killed him either right when he got out of the car in the garage or right when he stepped into the house from the back door. I believe then he was, put in the trunk of that Mercury Marquis and probably delivered to Central Sanitation, which was owned by Bozzy Vitale. And I believe he was incinerated at the Central Sanitation. Central Sanitation then burned down in an arson fire in the year after Hoffa disappeared, before the FBI could get a search warrant.
Conveniently.
Yes.
Wasn't it to the day? Wasn't it to the exact day, though? A year to the day that Hoffa disappeared?
No.
Irony or something?
No.
Can't remember that.
No.
Okay.
What you're referring to is
Think of something.
Carlo Licata died on the 6-year anniversary of Hoffa's murder at that same house, almost to the minute, at about 3:00 on July 30th, 1981. And Bozzy Vitale, who owned Central Sanitation and who was Tony Powell's boss, was followed by an FBI surveillance team. I think 72 hours after Hoffa disappeared, Bozzy Vitale was followed to New York, where he was meeting with the Genovese crime family, the top leaders of the Genovese crime family, ostensibly to fill them in on details of what had happened in Detroit. And then Tony Palazzolo, eventually, there's been a gravitation in the last 10 to 15 years for agents that have investigated the case. And a lot of them have gravitated towards the belief that Tony Palazzolo was the killer. He climbed the ladder in the crime family very fast after this, kind of was able to fast track his mob career. Post 1975, became a crew boss, eventually became a capo, then eventually was named the consigliere of the crime family. He died in January of stomach cancer, January 2019. And he was caught on a wire in 1992 bragging about his involvement in the Hoffa murder. And then in 2012, when Tony Zerilli, the former underboss of the Detroit mob, went to the FBI and tried to help them solve the Hoffa case, he told them that Tony Giacalone told him that Tony Palazzolo was the killer. So that's what I believe.
That's your theory.
I mean, it's a good.
That's
theory.
a pretty strong
It's as
theory
good
coming
theory
from
as
Scott
anyone.
Bernstein.
Yeah.
I'll
I mean, I
that's pretty
have
detailed.
to buy that. I mean, it's Scott Bernstein, Christian. I mean, this guy. But I'm just saying,
Right?
I buy all that, believe all that, as much as anything or anyone else. Again, that's much more knowledge than I had ever growing up, or even knowledge of until I met Scott. So, just for whatever reason, in my mind, for some reason, let's call it a hypothetical scenario that bodies could have been ground into pig's feet at the Detroit Meatpacking Company.
Where are you getting it?
Eastern Market?
Where are you getting that from, Gunnar?
in my head. So there's the reason why.
Because I feel like you're conflating it. You're conflating it with Tony Palazzolo telling everyone that he put him in a sausage auger.
I mean, well, Tony Palazzolo is like a great uncle. Was a great uncle of mine it's my grandmother's cousin. But anyway, so no, I know that my grandfather's warehouse in Eastern Market, Toco Produce, was behind the old Detroit Meatpacking Company, and I remember going in there, and they not saying they dispose of bodies. I'm not saying that, but let's say hypothetically you could, and it's downtown Detroit. It's only 10 minutes from where it happened with Hoff thing. I'm like, this could be a way to make a body vanish. So in my mind, all these years, that's where he went. But yours makes this as much. What about the was it Jimmy Q had the crematorium?
Jimmy Q owned Central Sanitation with Bozzy Vitale.
Okay, so
that's where I think they took him.
Who didn't somebody own the crematorium? The Bignascos, they have the crematorium. With the Bignascos, everybody knows they do all the bodies for the family, all the funerals. Could have went that way too, but sanitation makes more sense.
And Jimmy Q owned the crematorium with Bozzy Vitale at Central Sanitation. They co-owned Central Sanitation.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
And Carl Licata owned Tri-County Sanitation, so they could have taken him there as well. That's another sanitation company that had an incinerator.
I want to say that's the closest to the truth as I mean that you can get. I don't think your sources could be any closer than the man sitting next to me, and I think everybody. Scott, Christian, and Alan, I hate to say that I have to wrap this up because it's my favorite subject and everybody knows it, but we got to wrap this up. You can actually, Scott, where can people find you?
People can find me either on my social media, Facebook, Scott Bernstein, Burnstein, Twitter, Bernie's Tweets, Burneys Tweets. My web magazine's called Gangster Report, gangsterreport.com, and I write every day in the Oakland Press, which is a local Detroit newspaper. And then I have a podcast that's on Intercom called the Original Gangsters Podcast that you can find on iTunes and radio.com. Just got named one of the top 12 true crime podcast, one of the top 12 new true crime podcasts of 2019.
That's awesome. Who is it? Who awarded you?
Radio.com.
That's awesome.
So it's kind of like your boss is telling you out of all of our true crime podcasts, you have one of our best.
That's amazing. And that doesn't shock me a bit. And Alan, real quick, since we have to wrap this up, let's let people know how we can find you.
My social media is author Gunnar Allen Lindblom, and then you can go to on Instagram, Gunnar Detroit, and then my website is gunnardetroit.com, and then my apparel company is arthingapparel.com.
Go get yourself.
My books could be a king. My books are Could Be a King, Volume 1 and 2. Find them at Amazon. About a Detroit Mafia family.
Yeah, go get some of his gear, man. That needs to. Everyone knows about Detroit Hustles Harder and Detroit versus Everybody as kind of, or Made in Detroit. But our thing, Detroit, which is Alan's brand of clothing, is some really fresh gear, man. And everyone needs to know about it.
I own like 8 pairs of shirts, couple hats.
Alan's this is coming from someone that, and I think Christian will co-sign this as well. 2 published authors. I mean, for someone like Alan who got a late start in the game, he's incredibly talented, naturally gifted as a writer, and is just an outstanding storyteller. Mm-hmm. So
read the book. Read all their books. Actually, you won't get enough. And
Absolutely.
Christian, it's your turn. How can we find you?
Visit me at ganglandlegends.com, and my handle on all social media is ganglandlegend singular. My books are on Amazon. I got a lot of stuff going on, and it's been an honor being on the show with all of you. So, boom.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
The All-Star team. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I actually have my next guest is Lynn Fiskelli, and we'll be on here in actually a few minutes. So stay tuned. But thank you guys again. That was actually really good input. And that was the Real Irishman story, fellas. Thanks. Bye.
Later, fellas.